that's a logo we all know too well. You know, if you were a kid back in the 1990s, you knew that part of the summer that you spent was going to the movies. And especially if you were a young kid, you went to the local multiplex to see some cartoon of some sort. Most likely, it was a Disney animated feature, particularly of the 90s. Thus brings us to a little documentary that came out just a few years ago, and I completely forgot that this was made, and I knew that it was getting theatrical play in, like in major cities, as a small independent feature. And it's a little film called Waking Sleeping Beauty. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the trailer, and I'll come back with the comments about this film.
So here it starts. He starts establishing the rhythm. Clams pick it up, and oysters, and he's feeding on lobsters, whatever.
At the Walt Disney Studios from 1984 to 1994, a perfect storm of people and circumstances changed the face of animation forever. But it almost never happened.
Here it is, April 9th, 1980. This is the past to all you folks out there. And we're going to go inside and see what it's like. Come on.
Revisions. 100 drawings go in the trash.
The fact is that the last couple of animated movies made were not particularly good.
That year, we were beat out at the box office by the Care Bears movie. We knew we hit rock bottom when the studio told us that we were being kicked out of our own building.
I think after that meeting, we all kind of said, we're going to make great films.
The work was intense, the hours were long, and there was only one thing that could stop it all: margaritas.
This crew is the best crew. It's fabulous.
Can you really do what you want to do in animation?
We have to do in this company. That is our legacy.
From the producer of The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast comes the true story of the players.
Hi, Tim.
This is Tim Burton. And who are you?
I'm John Lasseter.
He's the cameraman.
And the passion.
The real heartbeat of this company was, is, and will always be the film business.
That fueled one of the greatest comebacks in entertainment history.
And the winner is Beauty and the Beast.
Told by the people who were actually there.
We were a group of artists living the dream. We went from hitting rock bottom to creating the most successful films ever. This is the story of how we got there.
Waking Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, so Waking Sleeping Beauty. This is a wonderfully made film. It's actually made from Don Hahn, who is the producer of a lot of those movies that we grew up watching from Walt Disney Pictures, being specifically the Disney animation. That would be going from, of course, this highlights the years from 1984 to 1994. And this would be the highlights, the height of the Disney animation. And what they briefly touched on is at the end of the film about, you may say, well, what about Pocahontas and things like that? Well, that's where things started to go downhill. But let's rewind to what the story is about. The story is about the Walt Disney Feature Animation Company, where this was at a time when the original 9 old men were either retiring or they had passed away, whatever, and they wanted to pass on the tradition to a new generation of animators. and leave it up to them to create movies and original stories. Unfortunately, that they had left such a legacy at the studio, and it kind of put a how do I want to say it, a kind of a curse onto the new people. And I believe it was Cal Arts that Disney really sponsored, and like a lot of those guys that went to school there to study animation, they came out of Cal Arts, and they were immediately hired by the Walt Disney Company to do feature-length animated movies. But in the 1970s and 80s, you got to think back to this time. In the 70s and 80s, the Walt Disney feature animation had mild success. I mean, it was actually going downhill. And unfortunately, it got to a point, especially in the 1980s, that Disney animation was just a joke. As a matter of fact, other studios were making animated films, and they were more successful. And it was quite sad because, they hear in the trailer, that in 1985, they were beaten out by the Care Bears movie, which was an independently produced movie. And to be all fairness, that movie's not that great. But they had released The Black Cauldron at the time. And the whole documentary film is about the changeover. Is when the 9 old men had left. A lot of the animators were like, okay, let's do it. Let's get creative. Let's start doing these things. And they started producing some films. And they tanked big time. Like I said, Disney animation was becoming a joke amongst the Hollywood communities, that you don't want anything to do with Disney or anything like that. And of course, the live action portion of the Walt Disney Company, the Walt Disney Pictures, was booming. They were having major success because at the time, Michael Eisner had just come on board, and he also brought on Jeffrey Katzenberg. And one of the things that they said that they really wanted to do was expound in motion picture studio. So then they created Touchstone Pictures, which we now know is famous now. And they were going to be producing more adult-themed material. They would keep all the adult stuff on Touchstone and keep the family-friendly stuff on Disney. But they never wanted to get rid of animation. They never let it go. But Disney, Jeffrey Katzenberg, yes, the DreamWorks guy, was in charge of Walt Disney Feature Animation. Actually, he was in charge of the whole motion picture studio. And it talks about in this film is that one day Michael Eisner, when he brought on Jeffrey Katzenberg, one of the first things he did was he took him a tour of the studio. And the last thing he did was Eisner took Katzenberg into his office. And he says, you see that building right over there through the window? And the window looked right out onto right onto this building. He says, you see this building right here? He said, this is the feature animation department. And of course, Katzenberg's like, cool, that's where they made all the animated stuff, all the animated movies, you know, Dumbo and things like that. And he said, yeah, that's correct. That's your problem. That's the exact words that Michael Eisner said to Katzenberg. That's your problem. So this became a long journey to reworking Walt Disney feature animation. The first few films were not successful that they came up with. See, when Katzenberg came on board, they were in the middle of production on The Black Cauldron. And Katzenberg was not happy about it. He was not pleased with what they were coming up with. But he couldn't change that because the film was already in production. They'd already spent all this money. And the film was getting ready for release. Then he said, hold on 1 minute, folks. I still am not pleased with this result. So he took, and I don't think anybody did this, not that I know of ever since, is that he took an animated film and edited it the same way that you would edit a live action movie. Because if you know anything about animation and how animated movies work, you edit the movie while you are drawing it. Actually, while you're coming up with the story, you take out the scenes that don't work. There's no sense in animating something that you know is not going to work. Because animation is very expensive, it's very cost prohibitive, so if you do the editing before you go to drawing the actual animation on the paper. See, back then the animation was done by pencil and paper. So that's, you know, that to itself, you know, informs you that these movies were handmade. And they released The Black Cauldron, was a box office bomb. Matter of fact, the director left the studio as soon as it bombed, and that was Richard. Can't think of the name of the guy's name. I'll put it down below what the director's name was. He ended up leaving the studio. He ended up forming his own animation studio. It's not Don Bluth. Don Bluth left in the early 80s. And he was not pleased with the direction that the studio was going. That's when the early 80s. And then he left, he formed his own company, and he started creaming Disney for like 3 or 4 films, and then Disney came back. But then 1986, they released The Great Mouse Detective, and it was a modest hit. And plus, it was the first movie to ever use anything computer-wise, in terms of computer animation, to a hand-drawn animated movie. Great Mouse Detective comes out, it's a modest success. Then Oliver and Company comes out. But before we get to Oliver and Company, there was a little film that came out called Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was released by Touchstone Pictures, produced by Steven Spielberg. And yeah, that was the film to bring back animation, especially Disney animation. Because once they made Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Disney came out with Oliver and Company, which was a very successful hit for them at the time. Then they followed it up with The Little Mermaid, even monster hit, Beauty and the Beast, the first animated film to be nominated for the Best Picture award at the Oscars. Then there's Aladdin, The Lion King. Success, success, success after that. And let's just say that this film lets you in on a few secrets of what was going on behind the scenes of all those movies. And it was very insightful to, that, you love these movies so much, but these movies there was actually, these were made by human hands. A lot of heated tempers. People walked out. And these were movies about, these were movies that were made by people for people. And I think that's the wonderful thing about Disney animation, is that, you can look at any animated movie in the world, and you can look at them and you go, okay, you can know who made what. Especially Disney. It's that trademark look that Disney had about it. Even though some people that worked for Disney and left, they went to form their own animation studios, such as Don Bluth. Don Bluth was a very successful animator at Disney. He only got to direct a couple things. He directed a short film called The Small One, and he directed the animation on Pete's Dragon. He was the directing animator on Pete's Dragon, and so that's how that came about. But then Don Bluth left because he was not pleased, and then he went and formed his own studio and produced films like The Secret of Nim. Spielberg hired him to do An American Tail and The Land Before Time, and they were supposed to do All Dogs Go to Heaven together with Spielberg, but Spielberg, because of creative differences between The Land Before Time, that project was dropped from Spielberg's hands, but Don Bluth still produced it on his own. But then, Don Bluth went tank after All Dogs Go to Heaven, pretty much. But then, Disney animation was eccentric throughout the 90s. I mean, I can recall growing up going to see those Disney animated movies when they played. Most of them played during the summer. However, Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, and I believe The Little Mermaid also played. They played in the fall or Christmas season, but then once The Lion King came out, everything switched to summer. And year after that, they produced a film every year, which was actually a goal by Jeffrey Katzenberg. He said, I'm going to set you guys up to where you guys are producing an animated film every single year. And when Katzenberg was in charge, that happened. Katzenberg left in 1994, 1995, I believe, and went to form DreamWorks, okay? But before he left, he greenlit a little picture that would change animation to what it is today. How about Toy Story? And they briefly talk about that. The guy who founded DreamWorks helped Pixar get their first animated movie started. It's funny how things work, isn't it? But yeah, Waking Sleeping Beauty. And it's a wonderful documentary, especially if you love Disney animated movies of the 90s. If you're a fan of Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, The Lion King, this is a movie for you. And it's not a kid's story. I'll tell you that right now. It's not a kid's story. It's very adult, especially if you're my age. It's going to appeal more to you. But yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful movie. Do encourage you, if you do see this, pick it up, watch it, and you'll find out a lot about your favorite Disney movies. So, from me to you, see you later.